Hey, it's Sean the Great, and you're tuned into another episode of the Key to Risk Adjustment. And I am your host, Sean the Great. And I just want to tell you that I am so excited to be with you on another episode right here live on Grade A. I've got my great friend with me today, Lisa Purnell, in the building, who is the Director of Risk Adjustment with Community Health Choice Partners. And I have Taelor Wright, who is Managing Partner of MedCenter Revenue Management Solutions. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yep, so make sure you lean in close to the microphone. And Taelor, for the sake of, can we adjust my live camera just a tad so we can make sure we get Taelor perfect in the shot? Yes, all right. So we're excited to be with you all today. Today's episode, we are going to focus on the 2024 CMS payment model and the changes to the model. So I just want you guys to think about that for a second. And so how was your day today?
It was great. How was yours?
I had a wonderful day on this Thursday. I had lunch with one of my favorite people, and we ate healthy. How was your day?
It was a very busy day. It was a busy day.
Busy day. What was busy in your day?
Doing more than I planned for the day. I prefer to stay home and work. The benefits of being a coder. And I had to get out, so that's busy for me. Had to get up and put on clothes.
I love it. I love the get up and go out and put on clothes, and but I also love it when I can sit at home and just hammer out and get all of my charts done and everything done that I need to get done, and then sit back and relax and maybe shut it down a little early or something like that.
Absolutely.
I tend to work late
Yeah.
when I'm at home.
Well, yes, I work longer when I'm at home.
Definitely.
Good.
Yeah,
It's
I
easy to get that
definitely
sucked
do.
in.
But it's a balance there because you don't mind because you're at home, you're still in your own comfort. It's
Yeah.
winding down still.
You don't have to worry about getting into traffic.
You can change the pace.
Right?
It's not as much pressure of the regular 8-hour.
I will definitely agree with that. So first of all, I really want to thank you two for jumping in with me on this very important topic. We should have a lot of listeners watching and listening. So I first want to just say, please drop your social media tags. Lisa, where can they follow you at?
I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook.
What's your Facebook?
Well, it's just me personally, Lisa Gaudiano Purnell.
Okay. And your LinkedIn?
I don't know. It's just Lisa Purnell.
Okay. What about you, Taelor?
You can follow me at MedCenter Coding on Instagram. And yeah, that's about it.
Awesome sauce. Okay. And for me, you can follow me at Sean Tatum on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, as well as on TikTok. I am the 5-star HCC coder. Ow! At your service. So listen, also make sure that you download the Grade A Radio app. Like it, download, subscribe. You can listen to the Key to Risk Adjustment on Grade A Radio. It is an awesome radio station with awesome DJs who are playing great music 24 hours a day. So make sure that you like, subscribe, download the app right now. Also, make sure that you go onto the YouTube page for Grade A Radio and download and subscribe to the Key to Risk Adjustment so you can get all the notifications of all of the upcoming shows. All right, so let's dig in. So y'all, CMS has come up with a whole entire new model, and my providers and other coders are worried. And so I was hoping that today we could get together and kind of get rid of a few of the myths and maybe shed a little light on some of the changes that are there. So first, when thinking about this model and what's changing, I think the biggest thing that I want to note is the impact and when the impact takes place. It's for this calendar year.
Is for this calendar year. Everything backdates to January 1.
So the rules didn't go into effect until April 1 of 2023, but it's going to impact all of the year and all of the calendar year for every date of service for 2023. All of these changes are going to impact your payment for 2024.
Correct.
Got it? And slow that down because I want to make sure that you got it. So everything that you're doing right now, you came into the ball game with one set of rules.
Right.
And the rules have changed mid-game. How about that? So let's talk about what's changed. So first of all, they've removed several diagnosis codes.
Oh, they've moved like 2,000?
Over 2,000 diagnosis codes
the
that have
map.
been removed.
And then they've added back around 250, 270 codes.
Wow.
And there's some new ones that we hadn't seen before on the model. But, so it's kind of exciting. So you win some and you lose some.
Absolutely. A couple of the things that really jumped out to me is that, a couple of the things that we've known for years that fall into the model, such as angina. And that is one of those conditions that is very prevalent. It does require a lot of patient care and management.
The big one that surprised me was dialysis status. That's being
Wow.
removed.
Yes, that's right. I can't remember how many times, the Z, what is it?
Z99 too.
Yes, Z99-2, that we've gone out and educated a provider on, hey, make sure that you're coding the status. Even coding once they've got the fistula in, because once they've gotten the fistula, you can code that status,
Yeah.
and then subsequently it would fall into their risk adjustment factor.
Well, you can still code it. It just won't matter.
It just won't matter anymore. That's.
Well, not towards risk adjustment.
Here's another one, and I'm going to ask you this one. I don't know if you knew this one. Amputations. So now prosthetics fall into the model.
Well, it's presence of an artificial limb,
Yes, lower limb.
and that hasn't been on the model before. So
Ever.
that's different. So it kind of makes up for some of the other things that are falling off, the things that are the most common that we've coded for years and educated and whatnot. And yeah, no, that's all changed.
Yeah, I'm wanting to make sure that, one, all of the listeners to the Key to Risk Adjustment that are tuning into us and that have subscribed on the Grade A Radio station on YouTube, that you've gone back and taken a look at some of our prior shows. But on today, we want to bring some of those things that I talked about when I was making sure to remind everyone that they had 1 day left at the end of February that they could then make a statement to CMS before CMS closed that opportunity for statements. But with talking about the changes and the impacts, I think the first couple of things that I wanted to just pull out are going to be.
Well, the biggest thing is when the announcement first came out, that it was going to be just a complete switch.
Yes.
And, 100% of the new model was going to be counted towards risk adjustment, but when the final notice came out, that luckily it's going to be a 67-33% split.
A
So
blend.
33% blend of the new model to 67% of the old model. And then vice versa for 25, and then in 26 it'll be 100%.
100%.
Yes.
So very much like the other models, right? So when version 22 was rolled out, it was rolled out and stratified like this, but it was in quarters. It was like 25-75, and then 50-50, and then on the flip side, 75-25, and then 100%. And so that is that model that we're in currently is what's going to be at the 67%. And then 33% of the new model. Did you have a question that you wanted to?
I'm sorry, I was.
Oh, well. I'm really appreciative of you coming in to engineer for us today because that's very, very helpful. But I know that you can join in the conversation at any moment if you have anything that you want to share. I'm gonna have to put on my specs here. I wanted to share just a little bit here. One thing that jumps out. A lot of my providers want to know what is going to be the impact financially, right? What is it going to look like for my payment year? Is there going to be shared savings for me and the groups that I'm associated with and the MAOs that I work with. And the estimates here so it says CMS said that the phase of this model would be over 3 years, and that they felt that this rate announcement would estimate a 3.32 increase in payments compared to the 1.03 estimated increase that was in the advance notice. So that's huge, because that's what I remember seeing before, that there was only going to be a 1.3. I was like, why are we doing this? What's the purpose? Why is it important? Why are we going to upset everything? And then a couple of other things that jumped out, which I think you and I were kind of discussing, and you and I too, which made me say, okay, I'm going to get off my soapbox about, imposing a lot of new changes on our providers when they just get it right, finally. Because this is also the update, because the HCC model currently was focused around ICD-9.
Right, everything mapped to an ICD-9 and then back to ICD-10 and then fell into the risk model. And unfortunately, there were a lot of codes that didn't crosswalk back. So it kind of messed up the model. So this time, first time since ICD-10 came about, that the risk model is going to be 100% ICD-10.
First time. So this is exciting news and something to think about. And so that is where I believe, and I think when we were all discussing this earlier, we believe that that's where you're seeing the fallout of some of these diagnosis codes, right? Because now they're not double mapping, right? They've mapped into the ICD-10, and then, they mapped into 9, back to 10, and then back into the model. And now it's just going to go from 10 to the model, which meant that all these additional codes that they didn't have to go back and map
Right.
fell out. But in that as well, I think that just looking at some of the cost expenditures, because so they also, the way that they framed the new model was moving from the 2014
2020, actually.
Okay, well, it was the 2014 fee-for-service
That's right.
and the 2015 expenditures,
Mm-hmm.
and they moved it to the 2018 fee-for-service.
Correct.
With 2019 expenditures,
Mm-hmm.
which is a big update. But you were about to say something about the changes specifically to the expenditures? Is that what you were going to jump in on?
No, some of the reasons that they've done some of those policy changes is they're cracking down on abusive and confusing marketing schemes, also coding practices, because a lot of the codes that are dropping off the model were ones that were being abused, over-coded, without documentation, kind of like that, ooh, it's a gimme code. They're going to be addressing problematic prior authorization practices.
Wow, yep.
There's going to be some changes to Part D
Yes,
that, with cost sharing, especially with insulin.
yes. I thought that was huge.
It is huge. It's $35, for, what was it, a year, I believe? And then there's no cost savings, your deductible does not apply to it, it's just $35 for the year.
And you're seeing that already on the news.
Mm-hmm.
People are seeing that on the news. They're letting people know that there's going to be some significant changes with regards to them being able to get their insulin, making it more readily available, which is great. That is
Exactly.
huge. So one of the other things that I wanted to just point out here in that is that one, the way that this is going to roll out, right? So with this year, next year being the first payment year, we'll see the impact. So all of the dates of service, so I think what I want my providers to know from here is, first of all of your dates of service from January of 2023 through June of 2023, all those diagnosis codes are going to get submitted around August, depending upon your payer, right? And those, along with all of the diagnosis codes from 2022, are what are going to impact your January of 2024 risk score.
Correct.
Right?
Mhm.
We're all together on that, right? Now, here's where I believe that providers, and because my providers are saying, what do we need to do? What do we need to be preparing for? How are we going to adjust? What do we need to look at? Well, there are a couple of things that I want to make sure that my providers are looking at. And so giving some structure and some time around that, I would say, let's think about June or July 1, right? So July 1 through the end of December, all of those codes are what's going to ultimately true up the risk score mid-year next year. So there's our opportunity to really start to prepare in these next few months before the end of quarter two, so that when we roll into quarter three, one, we've had an opportunity to meet with our vendors, because I think that's very important. During this transition, many of our providers have EMR systems that have HCC categories that are embedded within it. I am reminding my providers to reach out to their vendors, their EMR vendors, and to ensure when those are going to be updated, and when the old categories are going to be removed, and when the new are going to be added. In my mind, I see that there's going to be a blend there still, which is, I'm not sure. I think a lot of folks out there were hoping that it would go away.
Well, remember, we're still getting 67%
Correct.
of risk adjustment from the old model.
Right.
So, what I would tell providers is don't code anything differently. Just keep doing what you've been doing. Make sure your documentation is correct, and go on. Don't dwell on, oh my gosh, this is falling off the model.
Right. Because whether it was or not is what we don't want you focused on, whether it's in the model or not. Because that's what gets us into trouble oftentimes, if we're focused on, do I need to code this because it's in the model? No, I want you to code what your patient has and what you're managing and treating. Matter of fact, I want you to just document it and make sure that we code it appropriately for you. And if you need coders, you can reach out to Med Center Coding Institute. We have got coding classes and coders coming out soon that will be ready to come and apprentice in your practice.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm sorry, shameless drop there.
You're
All
good for
right.
that.
I'm good for it, absolutely. And as I said, we were going to have us a little bit of fun today, as well as drop some knowledge to our providers. So thank you, Lisa. You brought this really great graph. It's one that we've seen time and time again.
I'm going to do a disclaimer on this. This is approximate.
Okay.
But it's close.
So what we're looking at here, and I wish I could share on the screen with you all, but many of you have seen models where you've done a comparison of one version of the CMS model, like version 22 versus version 24, and then you got to see what that blended year rollout looks like. Well, that's what Lisa's kind of done, a rough draft of what that looks like. So just giving you what this blended model could potentially look like. So we're going to call them version 24 and version 28. And with version 24, well, first let me just give you the demographics of the patients, and then we'll give you some breakdowns. So we have a 75-year-old male who has COPD. He has diabetes with complications. He has congestive heart failure. He has portal hypertension. He has the presence of an artificial limb, which is a leg, a lower extremity. He also has an interaction of congestive heart failure and diabetes, and that interaction of that COPD and congestive heart failure, which gives him a sum of his relative risk factor of 4.477. Again, just thinking about that sum of that relative risk factor of 4.77.
And to clarify, that's V24.
V24, correct. So I'm going to let you run with V28.
Okay, so for V28, it's the same scenario, 75-year-old male. He has COPD, diabetes with complications, CHF, portal hypertension, and the presence of an artificial leg. The disease interaction between diabetes and CHF, COPD, and CHF. And so in the version 28, it's going to be 4.294. So a difference of about 0.2 reduction in the risk score.
I have a question.
Sure.
It's kind of off, but it's on base as well. How do you know that code specifically off the top of your head? Because since I haven't physically been coding. I've been more billing and educating and stuff like that. I haven't retained a lot of these newer codes in that way, and you just like popped it out of there, and I haven't seen you physically code in a long time. So I'm just wondering, how are you
That's a
keeping
great
that fresh on
question.
your
It is a great
brain like
question.
that?
I keep my foot in the game, so I still will, pick a few charts and I'll still will code to kind of keep, me fresh, because if you don't use it, you lose it.
Absolutely.
But as far as what I rambled off with the risk adjustment stuff, that's all research.
Yeah.
There's printed stuff from CMS that has the coefficients, and so it's stuff that's printed that
Yeah.
you can find.
Well, no, I meant the specific code, because you was like, yeah, that's Z, and I
Oh, the
was like,
Z99 too?
Yeah.
Yeah. In the 159, I-59.
Well, the 99
Oh,
too,
man.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's pretty.
Yeah, I mean, when you see, like these gimme codes I was telling you about, when
Yeah.
you see them constantly, almost on every chart,
Yeah.
you remember them.
Yeah.
'Cause I used to say when we switched from ICD-9 to ICD-10, I would never remember anything.
ICD-10 is way easier to remember.
Well, I always could remember hypertension because it was I-10.
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 Yeah.
There you go.
And if you live if you live in Houston, then you know that if you're on I-10, then you've got hypertension. If you've got to drive on I-10, and that also goes the same if you live in El Paso, because they've got I-10. It goes all the way to that
through.
end, and they have their own little pileups there in El Paso on I-10. But looking at these two, if you will, versions, so version 24 and version 28. So having a sum of the relative for the version 24 of 4.477, and then of the version 28 that Lisa broke down of 4.294. So there was a difference in that, right? So in the version 28, which is the new version, it goes down just a tad bit. Now then, there's what's called coding normalization and coding intensity, and those things kind of happen in the back end. So I don't want providers or anyone trying to do that algorithm CMS has put together for us. But when you bring that out, you're going to end up with a risk score or a relative risk factor that's just for the version 24. And taking that version 24, it is 2.62.
That's the 67%.
Yes. And then you would take you take that 3.93 and divide it and get 67% of that, and that is the 2.62, right? Then you're going to take that 3.9 and divide that with that 33%, and that's going to give you 1.29.
Correct.
And then you're taking that 2.62 and that 1.29 and combining them together, and now you have a combined risk score of 3.92.
1, 2.
1, 2, thank you. The difference in this, if you will, if you remember, I noted that the version 24 code, relative factor was 3.913 without taking out the 67%. And our final with the blended is still 3.912. It went down just a tad of a percent.
And same with B28, it's just 3.910.
Yeah, so I don't see that there's going to be, from just some of the things that we're looking at, some significant changes in the model. I think the biggest fear here was they were removing codes and we didn't know what codes that were being removed. And then when we looked at some of the codes, I think that some of them were rightfully removed. And then others were a little shocking.
Right.
The dialysis code was a little shocking, but then to really think about it, if the patient is in ESRD, then they're still going to fall into the same HCC category that they took the dialysis away. So in other words, you're not just having to be repetitive and repeating that they have dialysis status now. Now you can just code the stage, their ESRD, and still get the same risk value.
Yeah.
Now, here's one that I think is going to be huge. We have a lot of providers, and so this is what I like to call a Kodak moment. Say I said it, write it down, take a picture. Here we go. In a former life, I worked with a provider, and we did clinical documentation seminars, and I really enjoyed it. And he's a very intelligent man, and he presents amazingly, and so we worked really well together. But in one of our presentations, we talked specifically about amputations of diabetics, and the fact that many diabetics are going to a podiatrist, and podiatrists can only operate below the ankle.
Correct.
And a lot of people don't, or miss that, right? They don't know that. So they can only operate below the ankle. So if you have a diabetic in your family and they have peripheral vascular disease, and now they've got some ulcerations on their feet, and maybe potentially be in harms of getting some amputations. And you and I were having this conversation about amputations, Taylor, earlier. And with the amputations, now the great toe, middle toe, all those toe amputations are no longer in
They
the
don't
model.
Nope.
They're gone. But one of the things that Dr. Torkelson, and that's a name drop, mentioned in his clinical findings was that the metatarsal amputation was probably a better way to go for the patient anyway. Instead of them going one toe, then two toe, then three toe, versus just cutting all of those off and allowing it to heal and allowing them to get back to some normalcy of life. And that is still in the model.
Correct.
So something to think about. I think it's a better way of care just based on what I've seen other providers described, and certainly how Dr. Torkelson mentioned in that to me. And for those of you that are listening, I know that we're talking about clinical coding and risk adjustment, but when you think about your loved one, right? Because I try to bring this home to everyone. So when you think about your loved one, grandma or grandpa, who may be getting an amputation, and you're there at the hospital or at the doctor's office talking to that podiatrist, you want to make the best decision for your loved one. If you know that they still have a sediment lifestyle, that they're not going to get up and exercise and do all those things, and the doctor suggests, I hope I'm enunciating it correct, the procedure is the metatarsal, so they're basically going to take all of those up to that digit there on the toe. But midfoot. And it still allows for a lot of balance. They have good shoes that patients can still, and so they end up having better balance than even with the missing. But I found that interesting. That was probably one of the standout things, because I remember Dr. Torkelson talking so much in depth about that particular procedure, and how the study and research that he had done on that to show that there was a better outcome for those patients who just had that midfoot amputation versus having an amputated toe here, an amputated toe there.
Correct.
And so on and so forth.
And the other thing that was surprising on this model is that, with everything kind of going on with mental health, a lot of our major depression codes have fallen off.
Yes.
They're not there. Bipolar as well.
Yeah.
It has to be in a severe state before it'll fall into the risk model, going forward.
Wow. And, there's a lot of utilization that is around behavioral health right now, specifically post-pandemic. So the public health emergency will be ending in 30 days, 45 days? In
About
May?
45 days.
Yeah. And in that sense, a lot of benefits that were there, including Medicaid, will be very much impacted to those who were entitled to Medicaid based on the public health emergency. Those entitlements may be going away. And we really just want to remind, our providers that there is a lot of education out there. There are a lot of moving parts, but rest assured that we are here to support you. And I know, Lisa, you with Community Health Choice, you all have started to even lay out a timeline and how you're going to roll out those things for your providers.
Yes.
And making it easier for them to say, okay, so it's here, but this is how we're going to impact it, and this is what it looks like for you. And I will say that with the providers that I work with on the billing and consulting side, it's certainly some things that we've talked about. And again, preparing them for what their vendor may need to do. Also, reporting is one thing that I've really asked them to work with their MAOs and any other entities that they may be working with. I've asked them to lean in on reporting so that we can see if there's any differences in reporting of things that are coming out. There may be trends or things that come that we didn't anticipate.
Correct.
And so I don't want us to be latent and miss some things, as there's a lot of moving parts right now. So one of the things, Lisa, I wanted to bring out, so CMS says, and Taelor, CMS says that the changes to this model were to help to drive health equity and to drive comprehensive personal care and affordability and sustainability of the CMS model. So when I think about that, so again, affordability, comprehensive personal care, and sustainability. What does that mean to you when you think about that? Sustainability of the CMS model, because I think it's a government model, it's a big model.
I can interject.
You don't have it, you say, I don't have an opinion here.
I think it's driving towards, more equitable care
Yes,
across the board. So I think that's one of the big purposes of this change, outside of, getting out of ICD-9,
yes.
because that's old and it's gone, and
Yes.
it's bye-bye.
And when we talk about equitable care, patient-centered homes, and patient-centered care, and really meeting the patient where they are. Social determinants of health is also a big part of this change. In my mind, and I know providers have heard me say in the past 2 years that when we first started to hear about this potential change, I predicted, and it didn't happen this round, but I predicted that it would have social determinants as part of the risk weighting. There is
There are some.
a social eco in there.
Right, but I think in the STAR measures,
Yes.
that they're starting to create some of those
Absolutely.
measures that will address the social determinants of health.
Absolutely.
I think one of them is, it's Adult Universal Foundation, which includes adult immunization status, screening for depression, follow-up plans, screening for social drivers of health, social needs screening, and intervention, among others.
Right, absolutely. And when thinking about that, though, with how social determinants play such a key part, they're not captured.
No.
And that's where I had to pause on that, because it's like, with how they're captured. And so that's something that I used to really try and educate on, but it's hard because they don't understand, well, why? And there wasn't codes initially for it either. And for those of you that are listening and watching, your office staff, if you're a coder, if you're providers and you're listening, oftentimes your social determinants are going to be found at your front desk. Meaning, and what I mean found there, when your patients call to make their appointment, they're going to indicate, I need a refill, something happened, that your front desk person oftentimes is going to get that story about what happened to their prescription and why they couldn't get it, and they're in the donut hole, and that they can't pay their copay for their next appointment, and that they don't have transportation to come into the office, and then when they get to the office, that front desk person who is checking in your patient is also going to have an opportunity to document social determinants, because they'll hear things that you may miss or that may not make it into the encounter room, such as I got here an hour early because I used public transportation, and they dropped me off a mile away, and I had to walk in, or I had to wheelchair in, so I'm completely exhausted. They're exacerbating, and they didn't bring their meds with them because they knew they were going to have a long walk. So those things get captured at the front desk, and I really painted that picture just to remind that there's an opportunity to capture those and make sure that it ends up in the chart, because it is truly an impact to health. You had something you wanted to add there?
No.
Okay. Next, so we've got about another 9 minutes. and I wanted to make sure that we jumped in on the really high points. Let's jump in here to talk about the differences in the specific changes of the different categories.
So we already mentioned that we're dropping from 9,700 codes to 7,700, but we're increasing the different categories from 89 to 115.
Yes.
So they're redistributing, and if you see the HCC category numbers, those are all different as well. There's some that are the same, but there's some that have, they're high. We've never really seen all the high HCCs. Usually, I think what was the highest? 180 something,
81.
and now we're going up to about 212.
Wow.
I think there's some other ones as well, but 228 I know is the
189 was the.
189.
Mhm.
Okay, and I'm looking here. So, too many pages.
There's a lot of pages here. So what we have here, you all, and this is downloadable
463
on 463
is for artificial openings.
Wow. Whereas to artificial openings now are in
There's a 189.
yeah, 188.
88.
Mm-hmm. Amputations are 189. Traumatic amputations fall out of this measure.
For a particular, I mean, if they're with complications, it stays. There's
Okay.
a lot of things that have fallen out, like atherosclerosis of the extremities.
Yes.
A lot of that has fallen out, but if they have complications, it stays in the model. So, that's always a good thing because, it's going to drive cost up
Yes.
when they have complications. The other thing to note is, with diabetes,
Yes.
you have uncomplicated diabetes, and we tell our coders, we tell the providers if they have a complication, code it, because, it raises us up because, it trumps it. Now it doesn't matter. They
Nope.
all have the same RAF value. It's
Yep.
0.166
Yes.
compared to 0.364 or 368.
So I have concern with that because in the past, providers, when we told them, right, you code them all because there could be difference and there could also be interactive from the complications in those codes. So we told them to code all of the complications. Now, if they're saying, well, if I'm only going to get relative value for one, I'm just going to code one. So there may be an incomplete clinical picture of the patient left.
Agreed.
So that's a concern and something to think about. Don't do that. Let's make sure that you don't do that and that you're continuing with your coding intensity as you have. And again, I think, Lisa, you said it best earlier, don't change anything. Don't change anything. I think other than anything, we are going to add an additional layer of monitoring, looking to ensure that with those codes, what is the difference and what that's going to look like in the impact to the overall payment and shared savings when those fall back in 2024. I think that's going to probably be where the bigger opportunity is there. With this model and the changes, couple of takeaways as we begin to wrap up. Takeaway number one is there's some codes that have gone away that you want to be aware of. The anginas are some. What are others you want to call out?
Secondary hyperparathyroidism.
Yeah,
Renal
that's a big one.
is going. Sarcoidosis
Yep.
of lung.
Of lung.
Of skin stays. Then, you already mentioned the angina.
Yep.
Then,
There's a form of RA.
the rheumatoid arthritis with polyneuropathy,
There you go.
that has gone away.
Yep.
Polyneuropathy in general has gone away, even if it's due to drugs,
Gone.
inflammatory, it's gone.
Wow.
So like I said, a lot of the easy stuff, but the clinical picture is, everybody has kind of a form of it, and so they're wanting to get the more severe, because we always talk about the highest specificity.
Yes.
Well, when they get to be more severe, then that's when their cost rises.
Yeah.
And you want to make sure that they have that money in their so-called bank.
Right. Because there's nothing like going to the bank and you can't cash your check. And I think that's a new way that I can start
That's
to.
an excellent comparison.
Yeah. Wow. That
I
one
like
kinda came
that.
out. Yes. So let's put that in perspective as we wrap up. So there's nothing like going to the bank and can't cash your check. Everyone has had that at some point in their life. Some of us may not. Praise God, right? But thinking about that, so your wealth is your health. And in the same sense with your providers and coding your medical chart. So if they're coding your medical chart and subsequently they do not deposit all of the diagnosis in your chart that are pertinent to your overall clinical picture, then in your clinical bank account is going to subsequently be less. It's going to be empty. So in other words, if your provider, let me say it to the lay listener watcher, if your provider is not coding to the highest specificity and they're not coding all of your conditions and consistently coding them, then your bank account if you're a Medicare enrollee, when CMS is looking at what they need in order to care for you, they looked in the prior year at all of those diagnoses, and they say, oh, this patient is a fairly healthy patient based on their risk factor. So your bank account, instead of it being wealthy with all these cash expenditures based on all the chronic conditions that are being managed, it is broke.
One thing that you taught me years ago, kind of using that same concept, is when you're explaining it to people, you have patient A, and you're on a capitated plan. So you have patient A, you have patient B, you have patient C. Patient A is healthy. So you get that $10 a month regardless if the patient goes in or not. Patient B is kind of, so it's costing a little bit more. So it may be a little bit more than that $10, but it's less than what patient C is going to be dragging because
Yes.
patient C is a train wreck. And so he's sucking up, or she, sucking up all the extra funds from everybody's bank.
Yep,
So if you don't code properly, there's not going to be the right deposits.
that's correct.
That's
I love
correct.
it. We're making deposits over here. Bring me the bag. Trying to get the
Getting
bag.
deposits.
Yeah, we getting deposits. So we're over here trying to get the bag for our providers. One, making sure that your documentation supports the codes that go out the door, and remembering that documentation rules the nation. If it didn't get documented, it didn't happen. Listen, I've had a good time with you.
I
on here.
have.
We got to do this again and a lot more often.
I know.
Do you like the new set?
I love the new set.
Yay, yay. We got Taelor in the building today to help support us. Thank you, Taelor. She's keeping us, the cameras on us and keeping us looking good.
Working on my career in IT and camera and production.
You need to get with Cody.
Hey,
Yeah.
I'm expanding. Call me a renaissance, you know.
I love it.
You're still a young adult. It's time you reinvent yourself over and over again.
I'm gonna start me a podcast
There
pretty
you
soon.
go. But to follow up on something Sean said with documentation, it rules the nations. The biggest other key point I can say in this is that improve your documentation. Don't do less just because there's less codes.
Correct.
Make sure that documentation is there because it gets frustrating for us. When we're auditing, that we can't capture it. It's clearly there, but we can't capture it because it wasn't supported.
Yes.
So when it not only documenting, but also supporting it.
Yes.
What are you doing? What is it? What are you doing about it?
And it doesn't have to be a dissertation, and I think this is something that you mentioned in one of the providers that you were reviewing, that you couldn't find the documentation to support some of the things that were in one of the reports that had come from the health plan. So that's something that we want to remind our providers, right? In an inpatient setting, as we wrap up, I know we're close to the end, in an inpatient setting, there are probable and suspected diagnosis codes that can be coded. And those probable and suspected diagnosis codes were treated as though they were actual in that time and in that setting. So if a patient arrived in the ED or the emergency department and they presented with delirium, and maybe they were sweating and maybe had some other things which may have caused them to run a glucose test. And so in that sense, they coded them diabetic for the reason, right, the medical necessity to run these exams. So in that sense, it then ends up sometimes on that patient's panel as they're diabetic, but there's never been a dispensing of any diabetic medications. There's never been any additional testing or labs for that outside of that one encounter.
The best suggestion on inpatient is code from the, well, you have to look at the whole record, but also the discharge summary.
Absolutely.
Because then it's going to have your, what they were admitted for and what they were discharged for.
Yep.
And it may vary. You may see that they came in for, I don't know, acute respiratory failure.
Mm-hmm.
But by the time they leave, it'll say, it resolved.
Mm-hmm.
So an outpatient resolved means it's gone.
Yep.
But because it was, you don't want to leave the hospital still in acute respiratory failure, because otherwise that might cause a little bit of a problem.
Yes.
But, so that's, kind of the difference with inpatient and outpatient when you're auditing for risk.
Wow. Well, I will tell you, it has been great to have you here. And I want to thank you, Taelor, and I invite you to come back. And we are going to get out of here today. But before we get out of here, I want to just say thank you to all of our listeners. For those of you who are watching us on Facebook Live, for those of you who are joining us on the Grade A radio show, and make sure that you like and subscribe. We are really looking forward for you all to come back and be here with us next Thursday on the Key to Risk Adjustment, where we will continue our conversations about everything risk adjustment. And remember that the key is to keep educating yourself. Keep educating yourself and you will succeed. I am your host. I am Sean Tatum Williams, also known as Sean the Great, co-signed by Lisa Purnell and Taelor Wright. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you right back here.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, that's our jam. Hey. Gorilla on the track.